Hello, everybody. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. I'm joined by Logan Lowry, our Mississippi State beat writer. I cover Ole Miss. We're going to talk all things State and Ole Miss for the next 30 minutes. We'll hit some basketball, a little spring football, baseball, a little bit of everything. Logan, how are you, man?
I'm up earlier than what I normally am. This is about the time I roll out of bed every day. I know you're an early riser, and I'm kind of one of those guys that stays up late. So we do the same type of job, but we're on opposite schedules, it looks like.
Well, I am an early riser, Logan, and I'll tell you, I figure that's coming for you at some point. Early risers, man, things change. I never would have thought in college I would have become an early riser, but I do try to get up and get some things done. And speaking of getting things done, when Mississippi State terminated Rick Ray as basketball coach, I looked in my phone and I was going to send you the number for Bob Marlin at Louisiana Lafayette. I thought his name would probably come up in a search as a candidate, being an old State guy or something, and a Tupelo native who's done quite well. But that thing moved fast, and there was a big name coming with Ben Howland there. I'm wondering, Logan, was what we saw with how quickly State moved with Ben Howland and the money involved, was this a product of SEC network revenue? If it wasn't for the SEC network, would this have been a search that had a lot of mid-major names in it?
It's a possibility. Obviously a name like Ben Howland was not out there 3 years ago when they made the change with Rick Stansbury to Rick Ray. But I do think the move was already pretty much done before Rick Ray was fired. If you've got a chance to go after a guy like Ben Howland, a national name who's been to the Final Four 3 times, been to the national championship once, took 3 different teams to the big dance, and I think he's been to the NCAA tournament 10 times in 19 years. So his resume is better than any of the previous 19 head coaches that Mississippi State's ever had. So I think that maybe his agent reached out to Scott Strickland to kind of feel around to see if there's some interest between the two parties in making a move. Last time you and I talked, I told you Rick Ray would be back next year, and all the higher-ups at Mississippi State that I had talked to, had kind of led me in that direction that, he's going to get one more year to get things done there. But when you have a chance to go out and get a name like Ben Howland, you go get him, and hats off to Scott Strickland for getting that done. The attendance that was at his opening press conference rivaled what I saw, for Mississippi State's last home game. The interest had dropped that low at Mississippi State, and I think this may give the program a little shot in the arm to start things off. People are back excited, back talking about Mississippi State basketball in a positive light. I think there's some hope and some optimism now. So we'll see how that goes. When things get cranked up next fall.
What changed that vibe for Scott Strickland? Because I remember you telling me you thought Rick Ray would get another year. And do you think that vibe changed maybe after someone from the Howland camp reached out to Strickland?
Well, I think, and this is my own personal theory, I don't really have any sources or anything to back this up, but I think some of the big money donors wanted to make this happen. And when they said, this is what we're going to do, Scott Strickland just kind of went along with it. And, he wanted Rick Ray to be that guy. Scott Strickland hired Rick Ray 3 years ago along with Vic Schaefer. One of those moves had worked out, and to Rick Ray's credit, he cleaned up the program. He, the kids that he recruited are there's no behavioral issues. You don't see any off-the-court issues with those guys. They're good kids. They just weren't that talented. There weren't enough of them to get the job done. And who knows if Rick Ray could have got the job done in time. He just took over such a mess 3 years ago, and he just really didn't have much of a chance to get things done. I think this past year was the only year that he actually had enough bodies to field a decent basketball team. So, he may have got the job done over time, but I think the hire of a national name like Ben Howland gets the job done quicker.
Well, I tell you what, I know that there is a national name there. Looking at this from an Ole Miss perspective, and that's what we do. We're always looking at things from the Ole Miss and Mississippi State perspective with the rivalry. I see the Ben Howland resume. I see the national name. I see the teams that he has taken to the NCAA tournament, the consistency he's had in getting there. But then I see a guy coming into a state where he hasn't coached before. I see a guy who's been out of the game for a few years, not real long, but a few years, and a lot can happen in a few years. And I see a guy, Logan, who had some locker room issues at the end of his time at UCLA, and it wasn't that long ago that Rick Stansbury was coaching at Mississippi State, and one of the things that led to his undoing, I think, were the locker room issues. Is that a correct assessment there? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a different situation, whereas Rick Stansbury had discipline issues, with him governing, the team just wouldn't listen to him. And Ben Howland, it was kind of the opposite direction. He was too harsh on the team. He was too disciplined. So, one of the things he said in his press conference was he's kind of mellowed out some in these last 2 years. He's kind of been able to take a step away from the game. He's done some broadcasting and, visited some other programs around the country, kind of just taking a step back, and reassessed himself. He's 57 years old now. He's kind of mellowed out a little bit. So, I think that, everything that he said, and of course he's not going to slip up and say anything wrong at his introductory press conference. We'll have to wait and see how he interacts with the team and, how things actually go once the ball goes up in the air this fall. But, he said all the right things, and, Brandon Speck from the Daily Journal came up and covered the press conference too, and he and I were actually sitting in the green room, just talking after the press conference was over, and Ben Howland just came up to us and just probably had a 10-minute conversation with us about, the NBA, and he was talking to Brandon Speck about the Memphis Grizzlies and things like that, and he was just real personable. He didn't have to do that. We didn't ask him to approach us. He just came up and, just talked, like he'd known us for a long time. So, that, got off on a good foot with me, the fact that he was personable and seemed like a nice guy, and so I was impressed with that.
In the short time that the Tennessee job was open recently, before the Vols hired former Texas coach Rick Barnes, I saw a national writer just, throwing out a bunch of candidates, guys who he thought might be a good fit at Tennessee, and he threw Andy Kennedy's name out there on the basis of a proven SEC winner and a guy who has won basically at a job that has not been that attractive. And he went on to say that Kennedy would have to listen if Tennessee called, wanted to talk, would have to listen because the Tennessee job would trump the Ole Miss job in every way. I know, Logan, I've heard that applied to the Mississippi State job as well. You hear fans talk about, well, if you make a change, who can you get? I don't see the Ole Miss job as a bad job right now. I understand the history of Ole Miss basketball and what type of job that has been, but I look now and I see competitive salaries for the head coach and his assistant. I see a state-of-the-art basketball practice facility. I see recruiting ties in Memphis and proximity there. And the biggest thing, Logan, the albatross around the program at Ole Miss for so long, Tad Smith Coliseum, they're about done with it. They'll play a few games there next year, and unless something goes really way off on the construction schedule, they're going to move into that new arena next year around January. And and look what you have at that point. I mean, I think you've got a lot of advantages. I think you have a lot of resources that make the Ole Miss job competitive and attractive. If there needed to be a search. And from State's perspective, I mean, I heard people say, why would Ben Howland go there? And I'm thinking, well, man, I remember what those home crowds were like a few years ago, when they were consistently in the mix for the NCAA tournament. I know you do too. I think, I don't think it's fair to trash both of these jobs.
Yeah, definitely. And I saw several national writers talk about, why would Ben Howland move from Santa Barbara to Starkville? And it just, still talking about it like, may not even have electricity here. And, I've lived here for 9 years. It's a great place to live, and I've seen the town grow tremendously over that span. And it may not be Santa Barbara, but it's a good place to live. And You talk about the program itself. Mississippi State does have a little bit of tradition with their basketball program. Most of it in the decade of the '90s and the early 2000s. But like you said, they built a brand new practice facility a couple of years ago. Humphrey Coliseum is it's in okay shape. It's not any time for a change there. But the last few years, you've seen it half empty. And I remember when that was the toughest ticket in town, is to get into that basketball arena. It was filled to capacity for every SEC game. Packed to the rafters in that thing. With Rick Stansberry and even the late Richard Williams years. They had it packed in there. So I think Scott Strickland. I think that had a lot to do with the factor to fire Rick Ray. Just the fact that he couldn't draw the crowds, and the object of this whole thing is to make money and win, and that just wasn't getting done.
At some point, it becomes an economics decision, and you could see it heading that way for MSU basketball. I remember during the Ogeron years for Ole Miss football, November of 2007, Logan. It was the Northwestern State week. It was the Monday of that week. I visited with Robert Kayat and Pete Boone, and both of them assured me that Ed Ogeron was their man and would be back next year as coach, and he got the dreaded vote of confidence. And it was a few days later, on the Saturday of that week, that they swung open the doors at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium and attracted only about 25,000 for a football game, and economics had spoken. You can't do that in the SEC, and those things factor into decisions, and that may have been what we have witnessed with Mississippi State basketball. Shifting gears, a little spring football quarterback race at Ole Miss. I think I think most people have an idea who they believe will be the starter. I believe that will be Chad Kelly, the junior college transfer, the troubled junior college transfer, dismissed at Clemson, had an off-season arrest. All indications are he's walking a line at Ole Miss. He's doing the things he needs to do. And, Logan, players reach this point, and they get it. Jeremiah Masoli got it when he was at Ole Miss. I mean, this is your last chance to quarterback a major college program. Now, that being said, it looks like he's doing the things that he needs to do right now in terms of behavior and focus, and that was, Freeze's comment to us last week. On the field, man, and we got to see him really for the first time in a Saturday scrimmage this past week. I mean, the arm strength is there, the accuracy. He throws a nice deep ball. I mean, there's mobility. I mean, he could be the type of quarterback that Hugh Freeze has had so much success with in other stops. I mean, Ryan Applin at Arkansas State. I mean, that smart guy, good decisions, mobile. Not a blazing fast guy, but runs when he needs to, and probably a little faster than Bo Wallace. I mean, I think Chad Kelly has all of these intangibles if he maintains focus and does the things he needs to do off the field. I think he'll pick up the offense. Dan Werner tells us that he's actually doing that pretty quickly. So I know the competition is ongoing, and actually in Saturday's scrimmage, Ryan Buchanan and Devontae Kincaid, both of them third-year sophomores, they also did a lot of good things. But it just looks to me like Kelly has the ability, and I would say has the lead, although that's not an opinion that's coming from the Ole Miss program at this point. They're not giving a leader or discussing any kind of separation among those quarterbacks. But my take on this has always been that Buchanan and Kincaid are entering their third seasons in the program. They've had a lot of opportunities in 2 years to state their case, so to speak, with Hugh Freeze, and really, with those guys having 2 years in the program and Freeze having been able to see them in scrimmages and to some point in games, not as much in games, but Freeze still felt like he needed to go out and find a junior college quarterback, and I think Chad Kelly will be the winner when this is finally announced, which will probably be a couple of weeks into August camp. What's going on with quarterbacks at State? They're not they're not trying to find the starter, but now they're trying to find a backup.
Yeah, and it's tough for them to find a backup to be that number 2 guy to Dak Prescott. Right now they've got two of their quarterbacks that are in the injury pit every day. Elijah Staley had the off-season knee surgery. He is able to get out there and throw passes. He's not able to move around in the pocket. He's not able to participate in the scrimmages at the end of practice, but he's back there with the quarterbacks and throwing to the receivers and building that relationship with them and getting that connection down. And then there's Damian Williams, who's been the backup for Mississippi State the last 2 years. He's also injured. He has not done anything this spring except ride an exercise bike. So, really not a whole lot there. Nick Fitzgerald, the redshirt freshman, who's he was an early high school enrollee last year. He actually went through bowl practice last year and went through last spring and now has another year in the system. He's taken all the number 2 reps, and he's looked flashes. He's one of those guys that wasn't heavily recruited out of high school, came from one of those wing T offenses where they ran the option the entire time. And he's definitely very good at that. He can run the read option, as well as Dak Prescott can. He's still trying to get his passing down. That's something that's kind of new to him. But he's got a big body. He's about 6'5", about 220, 225. So he's getting a lot of reps this spring, and we'll see if that pays off when the race kind of opens up during the fall. When they get all 4 quarterbacks back. Well, I guess actually it'll be 5 quarterbacks with Nick Tiano joining the race at that point. But the job's Dak Prescott's, and he's looked really good this spring so far. You're a week ahead of me, Parrish, in the spring football practice. You'll actually get your stuff over with a week before I do. I think Mississippi State had their 6th spring practice yesterday. Most of the focus has kind of been on the offensive line, where they've had to replace 3 starters, and they have the biggest position that I'm watching is at center. Mississippi State lost all 3 of their centers last year, so Jamal Claiborne's taking all the first-team reps right now. He moved over from guard. And whoever wins the center job will take his first snap in Hattiesburg next year. He's never snapped a ball at the collegiate level.
You know what? In that, you can't take those guys for granted. When you talk about all 3 centers, man, I can't imagine needing all 3 centers during the season, but sometimes you do. Other storylines at Ole Miss, a lot of injuries on the offensive side, and a lot of excitement for the rehab that has been for Laquan Treadwell, and it looks like he will soon be, in his estimation, 100%, getting closer to that every day. But basically there have been injuries among the wide receivers, injuries among the offensive line, injuries at running back as well. So a lot of guys being held out, but there is a lot getting done on the defensive side, and as good as that unit was last year, leading the NCAA in scoring defense at 16 points a game, they think they're going to be pretty good again, maybe as good. I mean, you say that cautiously because you're losing 2 All-Americans, 2 AP All-Americans from the secondary, and free safety Cody Pruitt and cornerback Sinquez Golson, who had 10 interceptions last year. That's a lot of production in those 2 guys that you're not going to have, but they are really excited about 2 transfer cornerbacks in Tony Bridges and T. Shepard. Shepard's been in the program a year. They thought he would make an impact on the 2014 team. Then he ended up sitting out the season with torn tendons in a big toe. So he sat out and just watched last year. Those guys have come in. They're both over 6 feet. That gives them some length. They're physical players. If they turn out to be the good kind of coverage cornerbacks that Dave Womack thinks they can be, if they're the kind of guys that can basically lock down half a field, and you've seen those guys in the past at Mississippi State years ago, Robert Bean, I remember I covered him there, Fred Smoot, they had good cornerbacks through the years. When you have those guys that can really take care of a large area, it allows you to do so much more defensively. Those are the kinds of players that Ole Miss believes it has at cornerback right now, in Tony Bridges and T. Shepard. They've got some depth there too with Kendarius Webster, Kalo Moore coming along, having a good spring. Now, it starts with them. If they can cover, you can do a lot of different things. But the confidence that they have shown, the confidence this staff has in those 2 guys, allowed them to move a returning starter, Mike Hilton, to one of the safety positions at Rover. Trey Elston moves over to free safety. where Cody Pruitt was. And, it gives you some stability and experience there, and there's some young guys there. C.J. Hampton playing well, a lot of talent, and Armani Linton of Walnut coming in. They've got some parts and pieces to work with in the secondary, and looks like, Logan, that they have a chance to be really good on the defensive line again. Robert Kimdichie coming back for what, in essence, for so many in that class of 2013 will be a senior season. We expect these guys will leave after their junior year. Right now, Tunsil on the offensive line, Robert Kimdichie on the defensive line, Laquan Treadwell, pending his injury, depending on how he comes back. But I've seen those three guys in mock drafts for 2016 all going within the first 12 picks. I mean, that 2013 class, really you're going to lose some guys after this year. But looks to be really good. Ole Miss on the defensive line again, Kimdichie back. But the key here is going to be DJ Jones. I mean, Ole Miss, as good as they were in the secondary last year, they were just average against the run, fifth in the SEC in run defense. The better SEC teams really ran well on Ole Miss. Auburn did. LSU did. So they've got to get better there. And DJ Jones, coming in from East Mississippi Community College, gives them a 300-pound guy who can move, who's athletic, kind of a quick twitch guy. I think he's going to give them a chance to be a lot better against the run. So it looks like Ole Miss getting a lot done defensively this spring. What are some other storylines right now for State?
Well, Mississippi State on the defensive side of the ball is losing a lot of players. They lost mainly along the defensive line, losing Preston Smith, Caleb Ewells, P.J. Jones from Tupelo. Then you look at linebacker, they're losing Matt Wells on the outside. They're losing Bernardrick McKinney in the middle. So there's a lot of guys walked out the door on that defense. Jamerson Love at cornerback, Jay Hughes at safety. So every single spot on the defense, Mississippi State's missing some players. It's not that big of a concern, simply because they played so many players there. They rotated in and out so much last year that they're just bumping guys up that played a lot last year. I mean, you're replacing a Caleb Ewells and a P.J. Jones with a guy like Chris Jones, a five-star player. So that there is some depth there that they've had this year. Now they've got to develop some more depth. They've got to develop that second-string defense where they're replacing a defensive coordinator with Manny Diaz. There's not really a lot of familiarity with these players. I mean, obviously the fans know who Manny Diaz is, but none of these players played for him when he was there in 2010. So they're learning his skills. It really hasn't changed just a whole lot. Maybe some of the terminology, but all the schemes are about the same as what it was previously with Jeff Collins, so it's not really that much of a change. So, Mississippi State is looking at some different spots along, the defense, but, I've seen some, I guess really the only change that I've seen was Jamal Graham, the true freshman wide receiver from last year and punt returner, has now made the shift to cornerback, and he's actually running with that second team at cornerback, and he's looked pretty well. He's made that adjustment. You can see him getting better each and every day. The other day, I think Saturday, he had 2 interceptions during the scrimmage. So, he's looking better back there. They do have some injuries. Tevez Calhoun at cornerback is out with an injury, hasn't practiced all spring. Kendrick Market, the safety, is still recovering from a Achilles injury that happened during the Egg Bowl. So they've had a couple of young players in the secondary have to take that step up. Deontay Evans is playing a lot at safety for Market, and then Kevon Coleman is playing at safety too, where they were replacing Jay Hughes. So they're getting some work in there, a lot of reps and a lot of practice time this spring. At cornerback, they could afford a little bit of a hit. Obviously Jamerson Love and Tevez Calhoun were their starters last year, so now that role kind of shifts to Will Redmond, a Tolando Cleveland, a Cedric Giles who's coming back from injury. So you're seeing a lot of new faces on that defense, kind of mixing and matching, and they're trying to develop that depth that they had last year where they can play 2 full waves of defenses. I'm not sure if Manny Diaz is going to do like Jeff Collins did and just run a different defense out there for each series or not, but I do know he likes to substitute a lot, so we may see a lot of mixing and matching there.
Real quick, Logan, we got just a couple minutes left here. Let's transition to baseball. It looked last week like Mississippi State had gone like 44 days without scoring, kind of like Noah and the flood there. But they eventually did score a few runs. Ole Miss was not much better with scoring runs. The Rebels getting just 1 run in each of 2 losses in a doubleheader, being swept in a doubleheader at home last week by UAB. They go on the road, get 1 of 3 against Arkansas. I know State salvaged a game against Auburn. Both of these teams scored a little bit last night in some non-conference play. State losing at South Alabama, Ole Miss winning at Memphis. So what do you see offensively in this MSU team, Logan, heading into the weekend? I think they're against South Carolina, right?
It is South Carolina. They actually play tomorrow. They're doing a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series this weekend, which works out well for Easter. So I'll have Easter off, hopefully.
Yeah.
But, yeah, Mississippi State offensively, they're so uptight. It's amazing. They just get up there, and you can tell that they're tense. They're not playing loose, and they're doing a lot of bunting and just a lot of stuff that they're not swinging away. They're not comfortable up there swinging. They're not coming up with those big hits when they do have runners on base, and it's just I really didn't see this coming. Mississippi State started the year off 13-0. They're 6-12 since then. And I know SEC play started, but the easier part of Mississippi State's SEC schedule was the early part. And that's what's so scary about this thing. Mississippi State's going to have to make up a lot of ground over the next month, even if they want to make it to Hoover at this point. So, they had a chance to make hay while it was there, and they haven't. They've struggled offensively, and they've got to get things turned around in a hurry because some of the juggernauts in the SEC are still left on the schedule, and things aren't looking well for them right now.
With Ole Miss, it's been about the timely hit, according to Mike Bianco, but really the team batting average isn't that strong in the 260, 270 range. And when you're only hitting that collectively as a team, well, then it stands to reason that your timely hitting isn't necessarily going to be what you want either. So Ole Miss really needing to improve in both areas there. They got some of that last night in a 7-5 win against Memphis, a big hit with some runners on base from Colby Bortles, and really just maybe a launching point for Ole Miss into a weekend series against Tennessee. They will play on Easter in Oxford. Ole Miss will have Tennessee. This weekend game times are 6:30 on Friday, 4 o'clock on Saturday, and 1:30 on Sunday. And it's been an Ole Miss team that's been able to compete well, on the weekends for the most part, because the Rebels are still very good on the mound with their first 2 starters in Christian Trent and Brady Bramlett. Depth after that has been a concern, but we'll see. Still early in the baseball season, but both of these teams needing to make some strides. Logan, good stuff, man. Thanks for being with us.
No problem. We'll see you next time, Pierce.